Hi everyone, today I'm going to take you through the case study of Volkswagen about their famous emission scandal. Before moving to this case study, I would request everyone watching this video to subscribe 5 Minutes Learning channel in YouTube to get my recent case study video updates on time. Also, this video is enabled with English subtitles for your better understanding. Now let's move to the case study. The Volkswagen management came out with a plan called Strategy 2018. The automaker first rolled out its plan to achieve world domination of the passenger car market in 2007, with the creation of new models to achieve sales targets, especially in the United States, Russia, and China. With the support of Chairman Ferdinand Piëch, CEO Martin Winterkorn, who set the sales target at 10 million cars per year, an ambitious increase on the 6 million Volkswagen was then selling. The key to making the plan work would be to market clean diesel engines to the environmentally conscious segment of the American public. If this hit its goal, the company would overtake General Motors and Toyota to become the world's biggest car maker. 8 years later, CEO Winterkorn was forced to resign in disgrace, and Oliver Schmidt, who is Volkswagen's former top emission complaints manager for the United States, appeared before a US judge in handcuffs and orange prison jumpsuit, charged with fraud. The company was embroiled in an environmental scandal in which it was revealed that for nearly a decade it had been programming the computer code in its car to foil emission tests. Millions of its cars around the world were polluting as much as 40 times the legal limit. As of September 2017, 7 other mid-level Volkswagen executives faced prosecution in the United States. German prosecutors were mounting another investigation, homing in on Winterkorn and 35 other company managers. The company's stock had crashed. The automaker had been forced to put aside more than $30 billion to pay for the US criminal and civil penalties, reimbursements to US customers, worldwide repair costs, and other charges. While the company admitted guilt, Volkswagen senior management blamed the problem on rogue engineers who had operated without their knowledge. But investigators representing the German, American, and even South Korean governments were circling to put the blame on the people at the very top, keen to know who had allowed such a deception to extend so far and for so long. By the year 2007, Mr. Winterkorn had announced Volkswagen's plan to become the biggest automaker in the world, which depended heavily on selling diesel cars in the United States. The plan was backed by the forceful personality of Volkswagen's chairman, Mr. Piëch, who was largely responsible for building the company to its current status. Not only did the plan call for Volkswagen to nearly double its car sales to 10 million cars per year, this also demanded a dramatic improvement in Volkswagen's lagging profit margins. Mr. Bob Lutz, a former vice chairman of General Motors, who knew Piëch as a competitor, described his management style as a reign of terror. He said he once sat next to Piëch at an industry function and the Volkswagen explained how he got things done. Piëch told him when he wanted some groundbreaking design work done, he would call all his engineers into a room and tell them that if they couldn't invent a new way to do the job in 6 weeks, they would all be fired. Setting such ambitious goals, even if they can never be met, is a time-worn management strategy to increase internal drive for achievement. But Yale management professor Mr. David Bash said there must be limits set by the company's top management on how far one can go to achieve those goals. Stretch goals are very useful, But he said, precisely because they generate lots of pressure, you have to make sure they are coupled with a clear sense of what the boundaries are. You should never let the goal itself get the better of you. That was just missing at Volkswagen. Cars with diesel engines had never caught on in America, where they were perceived as a blenching stinky, sooty exhaust fumes. Diesels were popular in Europe, where smog regulations were looser and the government subsidized diesel vehicles through lower taxes. To meet the Strategy 2018, Volkswagen vowed to popularize diesel in the United States, and so began the Clean Diesel campaign. Diesel did indeed release few greenhouse gases than the petrol engines, but it also released other noxious gases. Carmakers had become proficient at trapping the particulates that came out of the exhaust pipe as brown smoke, but nitrogen oxides were harder to control. Nitrogen oxide emissions were composed of several pollutants, including nitric acid, nitrous acid, and most harmfully, nitrogen dioxide. High concentrations of nitrogen dioxide could irritate the lungs and provoke respiratory symptoms such as coughing and wheezing. Long-term exposure was linked to the development of asthma in children, heart diseases, poor birth outcomes, diabetes, cancer, and early mortality. Nitrogen oxide gases were also contributors to the formation of acid rain, ozone, and smoke. While BMW had managed to find ways to trap diesel pollutants and meet US standards, it came at a cost, reducing fuel efficiency and adding to the price of the car. Volkswagen set a tight deadline for the release of its new US diesels with a completely redesigned engine known as the EA189. Yet the problems with the emission system were not yet worked out. In 2006, designers realized that the new engine's exhaust gas recirculation system would cause the particle filters to wear out prematurely. They didn't want the customers having to replace the filters all the time, but neither did they want to add additional emission equipment. Engineers were not able to solve the dilemma within the allocated time frame and budget. Rather than solving the problem, the engineers turned to what became known as the defeat device to cheat emission regulations. This was actually not a device at all, but a few lines of software code running inside the engine control unit alongside millions of other lines of codes. The software detected driving conditions to determine whether the car was being emission tested in a lab or driven on the road. If it determined the car was not being tested, the unit adjusted operation functions like how often fuel was injected into the engine and how much exhaust passed through the engine's exhaust gas recirculation system, which in turn would influence its nitrogen oxide emissions. The software also affected variables like fuel consumption, performance, and how quickly the nitrogen oxide filter wore out. The defeat device was designed to turn on maximum emission controls only when the car's computer determined that it was on the rollers undergoing emission test. When on the road, the controls were turned down and the cars emitted many times the pollution produced in the testing situations. In the late 2008, when Volkswagen introduced its clean diesel campaign in the United States, the launch was also accompanied by a major advertising campaign designed to repair the reputation of diesel engines. It was an ad blitz that went on for years with dozens of cute and catchy television commercials, In Europe, where diesel was cheaper than petrol and relatively high fuel prices made customers efficiency conscious, Volkswagen could use fuel economy as a main selling point for its vehicles. But in the US, petrol was cheaper and diesel was slightly more expensive. Volkswagen wanted to use the environmental credentials of its new EA189 engine to compete with Toyota's Prius hybrid. Clean diesel was touted as the Volkswagen's top-selling feature. The new Volkswagen models passed the tough US emission tests with flying colors for 7 years. The company's deception might never have been caught if it weren't for three graduate students from West Virginia University who were testing diesel emission in 2013 using a funky-looking homemade device that hung out the back of the car's tailpipe while it drove on the road. The students at the West Virginia Center for Alternative Fuels, Engines and Emissions were testing to see how well diesel emissions equipment performed in a variety of driving scenarios, such as on the freeway and in hilly city conditions. When they checked their data, they were shocked to see that the Volkswagens performed poorly in almost all situations. Their other test car, a BMW SUV, did well in most conditions. But when they tested the cars in the workshop on rollers, all the cars easily met emissions requirements. Even after these findings, nothing much happened. The students published their 117-page study in 2014 without even naming the brand of the cars tested. When the California Air Resources Board, one of the country's toughest pollution regulators, heard about the results, they asked Volkswagen to explain them. They had a good working relationship with Volkswagen and expected some kind of a technical problem that could be easily resolved. In September 3, 2015, a group of managers, including several mid-level managers from its US emission unit, held a meeting with California officials and admitted that Volkswagen diesel cars had different settings for when the vehicle was being tested than for normal usage. The software was programmed to turn on maximum emission controls only when the car's computer determined that it was on the rollers undergoing emission tests. When on the road, these were turned down and the car emitted up to 40 times as much pollution as in testing situations. The public didn't learn about the problem until the EPA issued a formal notice of violation 2 weeks later on September 18, 2015. Put simply, these cars contained software that turns off emission control when driving normally and turns them on when the car is undergoing an emission test. The EPA said almost 450,000 diesel cars sold in the US would be recalled. A week later, on Friday, September 21st, the problem mushroomed as Volkswagen issued a statement admitting that the device had been installed on 11 million diesel vehicles sold worldwide over an 8-year period. Things just went from catastrophic to apocalyptic, opined the auto industry blog. By following Monday, Volkswagen stock price had lost 20% from the $167 a share to $133. By the end of September, it would fall to $104, a combined fall of 37%, wiping $20 billion of its market capitalization. Lawsuits started pouring in from regulators at federal, state, and international levels, from shareholders and from customers. Criminal prosecutions were launched. dealers began demanding to know how they would satisfy customer concerns about their pollution-blenching engines. Eco-conscious customers held picket signs at court hearings, demanding the Volkswagen buy back their cars. The company was excoriated by the press. Newspapers dubbed the scandal Dieselgate. The New York Times editorialized, "What was Volkswagen thinking?" The Nation wrote, "Volkswagen lied and cheated 11 million times. Will anyone go to jail for that?" The top company officials claimed they never knew about the cheat devices, which they said were the work of a few rogue engineers. On September 21st, Winterkorn claimed the irregularities in the diesel engines were due to terrible mistake made by only a few. He said, "I'm not aware of any wrongdoing on my part." Horn likewise denied corporate responsibility. This was a couple of software engineers who put this in for whatever reason. He told hearing by a subcommittee of the House of Representatives. He confirmed that Volkswagen has suspended 3 employees but refused to name them, citing German employment law. To my understanding, this was not a corporate decision. This was something individuals did. Volkswagen refused to name the suspended employees or even disclose the reasons for the suspensions, but the media confirmed that by mid-October 2015, about 10 people had been suspended in relation to the investigation. None were top managers. In the late September 2015, Volkswagen hired the US law firm Jones Day to conduct an internal investigation into how the deception came about and said it would make the results public. "We were working hard to find out exactly what happened," said Mr. Winterkorn in the days after the scandal became public. "To do that, we are putting everything on the table as quickly, rigorously, and transparently as possible. We owe that to our customers, our employees, and the public." The company appointed Christine Homan-Donat, a former Daimler executive, to oversee integrity and legal affairs to straighten out the company's process. She was the first woman ever to sit on the Volkswagen board. But as months of investigations, legal hearings, and negotiations unfolded, the company's actions repeatedly drew questions about whether Volkswagen was serious about its changes. After CEO Winterkorn resigned, the board chose one of his longtime lieutenant, Porsche CEO Matthias Müller, to replace him. Mr. Müller had been head of Volkswagen product planning from 2007 to 2010, the same time Volkswagen's clean diesel campaign was being launched. After promising transparency, the company refused to turn over internal emails to state attorneys general in the US, citing German privacy laws. The company refused to release the results of the internal investigation commissioned from the law firm Jones Day. Despite its earlier promises that the report would be made public, Chairman Hans-Dieter Porsche said releasing the report would result in massive fines for the company. Mueller appeared to remain in denial about the gravity of the company's actions when he responded to a national public radio reporter's question. "We didn't lie, we didn't understand the question first, and then we worked since 2014 to resolve the problem." That's what he said. After prompting international outrage, Mr. Mueller said he had misspoken and asked to do the interview again. Ms. Christine, hired to handle integrity and legal affairs, lasted little more than a year. Volkswagen issued a statement that said she had toughened the company's compliance structures but was leaving due to differences in their understanding of responsibilities and future operating structures within the function she leads. She left with a £10 million payout. While the Volkswagen's excess diesel emissions couldn't be directly linked to any death, studies projected a high death toll nonetheless. A team of researchers led by an aeronautics professor from MIT estimated that in Europe, the excess pollution released by Volkswagen diesels skirting the pollution limits would eventually result in 1,200 premature deaths. In the United States, where diesel vehicles were far less common, Volkswagen's emission excesses were expected to cause 60 premature deaths by 2016. In total, the European Environmental Agency estimated that nitrous oxide pollution, much of which came from diesel vehicles, caused 75,000 premature deaths in Europe each year. Diesel exhaust was blamed for major smog crises in European cities, including a spill in 2015 that briefly made Paris the city most exploited and polluted city on earth. Paris, Madrid, Athens, and Mexico agreed to outlaw diesel vehicles from the city center by 2025. Britain and France vowed to stop allowing diesel vehicles by 2040. Many German cities faced possible court orders to ban diesel vehicles after an environmental lawsuit. An automobile buyer began to recognize the effects on the environment. Diesel car sales in Europe plummeted. During the first 6 months of 2017, sales declined 10% in Britain, 9% in Germany, and 7% in France. Many questioned whether Europe's love affair with diesel was over. Once the problem with Volkswagen diesels came out, other companies were also suspected to being in violation of emission regulations. Daimler began voluntarily upgrading the emissions control on its Mercedes diesel cars in 2017, in what many saw as an attempt to avoid the kind of penalties what Volkswagen was facing. In the past, its emission equipment only operated at its maximum efficiency when the weather was within a narrow temperature range. The upgrade promised to broaden the temperature range. However, it seemed that while other manufacturers' vehicles might have exceeded emission limits during the driving cycle, they had not apparently done as Volkswagen and programmed the software to detect when the vehicle was under test conditions and adjusted its emission in that mode to meet the regulations. Meanwhile, Volkswagen showed signs of resilience at the end of 2017 due to an increase in sales of mostly non-diesel cars in China. Volkswagen claimed the record for having sold more cars than any other automaker in 2016. For that year, its goal of world domination was actually achieved. Thank you everyone for watching this video. See you soon with another interesting case study. For more such case studies, please subscribe 5 Minutes Learning channel in YouTube.